Hi, this is Focus 360. I'm Kenneth Schock.
And I'm Edie Adams.
Today we have Martha Fleetwood, who is an attorney. She's also the one who founded HomeBase in San Francisco, California, and she drove all the way down to be on the show today. And Martha, I want to thank you for that escapade to come all the way down and fight all that traffic. Now, you're an attorney and you founded HomeBase. Now, what is HomeBase?
HomeBase is the regional support center for homelessness policy and programs, which sounds somewhat jargony, but it's a project that was created by a public interest law firm in conjunction with the Association of Bay Area Governments to bring together people from the nonprofit world and the local government community to figure out how they could work in partnership to solve homelessness.
Now, what is homelessness? I'm going to hit you with a broadside here and see how you deal with it. I hear stories through the grapevine and other areas that the people who are homeless are really a bunch of derelicts. They're drug addicts, losers, dropouts of society. And you've heard things like that now, the stereotypes.
Right.
And is that really true? Are the people that are really out there without a home, are they really what I'm saying?
A lot of stereotypes are formed both by the perception of who you see on the street and can identify in your own mind as, oh, there goes a homeless person or a derelict or someone who's crazy, but also from stuff that's been handed down through history, sort of the oral traditions of our culture when we, as a community, when we talk about people who are drunk or don't fit or skid row bums and that sort of thing. And what many people fail to understand is that homelessness now, during the 90s, is very different from homelessness in the past. Homelessness now, sort of, you asked what is it, it's a very big thing. It's sort of a matrix or an intersection of problems that people are having because of the way we provide housing in our community, the way we provide incomes to people, whether it's employment or through welfare grants, and also the provision of support services to sustain people's needs when they have problems with their housing or incomes. And if you think of it as sort of these three almost balls, there's like a housing ball, an income ball, and a support service ball, that everybody is keeping balanced at all times, whether you're rich or poor. You have to keep these three balls in balance to sustain your livelihood. Homelessness is about poor people's inability to keep these balls in balance, and eventually the housing and the income one collide and they fall out, or the housing one and the service one collide and they fall out. That's what homelessness is. It's sort of the disintegration at the bottom of these three things when people can no longer hold them up in the air.
And this problem is compounded when there are families involved, and more of that is on the rise?
Absolutely. The rise of families within homelessness, which is the fastest growing segment, if you will, of people who are homeless in this country and in all of our communities, is caused by the same factors. If you look at things like housing cost in a community, in this community in Santa Clara County, the cost of housing is phenomenal when you think of what it means to be poor and to need a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment. We have all these standards that government sort of creates for us that lets us think things are okay. We have subsidized housing for poor people. We have projects for poor people to live in. So then the natural question is, why are those people out on the street? We have this stuff we do through our government and through our tax system. But the reality is that if you're a family and you are trying to get into housing, you need to earn 300 to 400% above the federal poverty line to afford housing in this community. And the federal poverty line defines both your minimum wage amount if you're working and your welfare grants. So it doesn't give you 300 or 400% above what the poverty line is to access housing just because housing here costs so much. There's no, the two things are just not related in a way that allows you to get housing, and that's why so many families are falling out now.
Well, what is the poverty line as defined by the federal?
It was $12,700 for a family of 4 the last time I looked, but that's probably like 2 years out of date.
So we'd have to be 300% above that in order to survive.
To get a 2-bedroom apartment.
So homeless people find themselves, homeless people of all types find themselves in some sort of vicious circle? What happens?
Well, if you sort of think about your own life and sort of the life of anyone, that you're in housing. For most people now, the majority of people are now homeless. They didn't start that way. They weren't born that way. There are children now being born into homelessness, but the majority weren't. So that means that people had housing. They either grew up with their parents and were in housing, or they had their own housing. They had some level of income, and they had their support services taken care of. What happens is that people who live with these three things barely balanced are at risk. They don't have a lot of resources. They don't have a big bank account. They don't have a lot of savings. They don't have stocks. They don't have large amounts of equity sitting around to tap into when their job falls apart, the employer that they worked for moves out, or some big corporation comes in and buys up the corporation they worked for, and there's a reduction in force and jobs are lost. A number of things happen within that income stream to people that it means they can no longer afford their house payments or their rent payments, okay? For people who live on welfare, a number of things happen within the realm of their income also. They miss a date with their social worker. They miss an appointment. They have a health care crisis that eats up the amount of money that they got. Something happens, and because there's no resources that they can draw on financially to then make the rent payment, they're out on the street. A whole lot of life circumstances happen to people to cause them to become homeless when their resources are short, when they don't have a lot of equity to tap into. Health problems, a large number of people on the street have had a health crisis, and I don't just mean mental health. Heart attacks,
right.
illnesses, all kind of problems that because their equity is small or their job falls apart because they can't be gone as long as they need to for their health, they lose their housing. They just don't have the money. A big common cause of homelessness is domestic breakup. The typical thing that's happening pretty epidemically, frankly, throughout our society, people's inability to sustain their interpersonal relationships in units that provide them housing, i.e. the family, whether it's a traditional family or not. When people break up, somebody's got to move to a new place to live. And that somebody better have some equity saved up so they can make that initial down payment to get into an apartment or a new home. And they have to be able to deal with making the payments, both the person who moves and the person who stays. Suddenly, you know, there's two people, two households where there was one.
So you're saying people are not getting along because of interpersonal problems of communicating, and then it gets into financial difficulty, and then when they drop out and they become homeless, then another set of circumstances enter the picture, and then it's going to be really tough to get back out of that.
Right. It's sort of, it's not quite a circle. It's something that sort of goes like this. You're in housing and you have your needs taken care of, and then something happens. And the something pretty much across the board is a health crisis, a divorce, a job loss, some event like that, eviction even from a landlord who now wants the unit for his own purposes. So these sort of common circumstances happen to people that in a community where resources are more plentiful, where people are not living financially on the edge as much, those changes wouldn't necessarily put you out on the street. But it became very common in the 80s that when those changes happened to people, that they went through a process. And this is important to understand, because the process is not automatically from you're in a house and your life is okay to you're on the street. It really is, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? I'm running out of money. I've been in this apartment as long as I can stay without paying the rent, so I move on, or I talk to the landlord. Moving on means I go stay in a motel or a hotel, exhausting the last amount of my money, trying to hold on. Then I call up my friends or my family, and I stay there as long as I can. And it takes pretty much close to 3 months for most people to go through the cycle of everybody they can tap into until they end up in what becomes the public system then, the shelter system, go into government and seeking motel vouchers or some other sort of financial assistance.
So it can happen within 3 months, is that right?
Yeah.
Wow, that's
sad.
scary.
Yes,
Yeah.
it
That's
is. I mean,
scary.
everyone is almost on the
Okay, I have not a colleague, but an acquaintance who was making $65,000 a year, married, has 3 children, and he's right on the edge now. He's saying that he can't make his house payment, and he has a motorhome. I don't know why he has that, but and it looks like he may be on the streets before long.
Right.
And is that a real
That's
situation?
a reality. That's a reality. And in the 5 years that HomeBase has existed, we've looked at all of these issues and intersections and interviewed hundreds of people to try to learn what is it that's causing homelessness, what is it that happens on a big scale within our community that we can try to focus on intervening with public policy solutions. What is it our government can do at federal, state, or local level? What is it that our cities can do? And then putting that aside for a minute, we then look at the human beings who sort of go through the system and fall out and figure out, okay, well, what kind of programs do we need to have in place for them? And for the most part, nonprofit agencies in the community run the programs. So we spend a lot of time trying to figure out what's needed and then get it into place. So for someone like what you just described, your friend, there are programs that have been designed to sort of catch people before they fall off the cliff.
It's like a safety net.
Right. There are programs that are run where you can go and you can sit down and say, here's my financial situation. I don't know what to do, but I know in another month or two I'm going to lose everything I've worked for, and I'm going to have not a clue where I'm going to go for help.
He's really depressed. I talked to him, I can hear it.
Yeah, it's a terrible situation.
Martha, how do you find homeless? Do you use resources such as the census? You mentioned that you interview people, but how can you find the homeless and I guess not the right word. I was going to say track track their status or monitor how they're doing? How do you find them?
Well, there's different groups of people that sort of, when you talk about the homeless people as an overall whole, within the people who are homeless is really the microcosm of the rest of our society. There's some of everybody who has been homeless or is homeless. Elderly people, people with mental problems, people with drug problems, people with alcohol problems, people with no problems except they don't have any money. Okay? People who used to have great jobs, people who never had a job. The whole spectrum. And in communities where we've gone to try to get a sort of a portrait of the community, we go and make sure that we interview the visible homeless, the people that you see in the parks, the people that you see on the street, the people who panhandle, the people who stand in line at food pantries trying to get monthly food boxes, the people who go and eat at soup kitchens, the people who go and stay at emergency shelters. So there's all kinds of places where people will go for assistance, or will they appear publicly and try to meet their own needs. And that's where we go, and just, it's outreach, you know. Hi, how are you? Are you all right? What can we do to help you? Where did you stay last night? How did this happen to you? And it's a whole hour-long kind of interaction to try to learn what someone's experience is and to give them the opportunity to inform public policy from their own life.
Is it also helpful if you look at these kinds of, visit these people and look at the numbers of them to try and find trends? Does that help at all, or is there no trend that it just could happen to anyone, and it's not 100% preventable?
Well, we spend a lot of time looking for trends because the sort of trends, the similarities between people's stories is where you begin to build programs. If we find a number of people, for instance, as we have, who are coming out of hospitals for a variety of conditions, you know, whatever reason anybody would go to a public hospital, and then on discharge from the hospital, they have nowhere to go. So that becomes a similarity in the circumstances of several people that when you look at it, you go, well, a way to keep them off the street is for the hospital at the point of discharge to be able to refer them to a shelter, housing, a landlord, something,
and that's
somebody.
being done, I'm assuming.
What's the kind of thing that we keep trying to do.
How many people are homeless in San Francisco?
The numbers vary county to county constantly. In San Francisco, it stays at about 6,000 is the number that's most commonly used. But the number of 6,000 refers to people within a year who would have experienced homelessness. It's not that on any given night you can go out and find 6,000 people. It's sort of 6,000 different people. And in Santa Clara County, the most recent numbers showed that about 10,000 parents and children experience homelessness in a given year.
In fact, we're going to talk about some of the numbers when we come back. We need to take a break. So let's take a break. We're talking with Martha Fleetwood from HomeBase in San Francisco. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Hello. Research indicates we Americans create too much garbage. So I have spent years developing worms that eat garbage at astonishing rates. Some eat more than others.
There's an easier way to save the world. Recycle. To find out more, dial 1-800-CALL-EDF.
Hi, we're Los Lobos.
Survival is important to every community.
And right now, AIDS threatens all of us.
The only cure for AIDS is prevention. You don't have to have sex, but if you do,
Stay with your own partner and use a condom to help protect yourself.
please avoid drugs, and especially don't share needles.
Look around at your family.
And your community. That's who you're saving, because survival means preventing AIDS.
Wake up all the teachers, time to teach a new way. Maybe then they'll listen to what you have to say.
The power of teaching.
The world won't get no better if we're just...
The power to wake up young minds. The power to wake up the world. Teachers have that power. Reach for the power. Teach. I'm Edward James Olmos, and we're recruiting new teachers. Call 1-800-45-TEACH.
So how's your cousin's new car?
Oh, yeah, my cousin's new car.
Yeah.
He picked it up last week.
All right.
Big celebration.
Yeah?
I felt like a jerk telling him he should take a taxi home because he had one too many.
But you did.
No, I didn't.
What happened?
Totaled.
What?
Yeah, and him with it.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah.
Take the keys. Call a cab. Take a stand. Friends don't let friends drive drunk.
We're back in talking with Martha Fleetwood, one of the founders of HomeBase, and we have some booklets here for our viewers who would be interested in more information concerning this issue. And this is called Homelessness in the Bay Area, and this is a study that was done by HomeBase.
Yes, it's a report that we spent 2 years putting together, trying to put into plain English for ordinary people an hour's worth of reading to explain the entire history of homelessness in the United States and what it means now and what needs to be done about it.
It's a great book. I went through it, and in fact, I have about a dozen paper clips here that I've clipped and highlighted. It took me about an hour to read through it carefully, and I saw a lot of things in here. I'd like to go through each of the points if we could. There are like 10 points that you mentioned here, and I'd like to talk about it for just a couple of minutes. This point 1, solving homelessness, understanding the social and economic causes. Could you just highlight that point briefly, talk about what that...
Sure. What we talk about in that part of the report is the social and economic causes on a very macro scale. What's happened in the United States in the decade of the 80s and now into the 90s that so profoundly changed our communities that people are living on the street? This is a profound change, unlike anything that's been seen in this nation ever. And people don't understand it. And out of their lack of understanding, they blame the people that they see. Oh, they're drunk, oh, they're alcoholics, they're crazy, it's their own fault.
And fear gets involved.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Don't come panhandling me, you're invading my space. All those kind of things come because we have lived in our lifetimes through a transition of our economy so big that it doesn't have a label yet. The Great Depression is a nice label. You can sort of hold it in your head and put it away and not worry about it. It was the past. There's no label yet on this that lets you understand how profound the change was that you've lived through, and that's what this tries to address.
Do you think it's going to get worse in the next few years?
It is getting worse.
It's getting worse right now.
It's getting worse right now. It's getting worse every day.
And this particular book is available from your organization, from the HomeBase organization?
Yes, anyone can call our office and leave your address. We'll send a copy.
And the number for this booklet?
Our phone number is 415-788-7961.
7961. And that they'll be able to get a copy of this.
Right. And we also have the 1991 annual report. I don't know if I can hold this up. Of HomeBase. Is that also available?
Yes, the annual report describes the work that we do, the different projects we have on educating homeless children, on providing child care for homeless children, on looking at the public policy issues involved. So it really tells about our work, whereas that report talks about the issue itself.
Can we go through the rest of these points just briefly?
Sure.
And point number 2, it says unraveling the causes. Insufficient incomes create an unstable economic environment. I assume that you're talking there about economic problems.
Yes, individual economic problems, what it's like to try to survive off of minimum wage, even working full-time. In 1968, if you worked full-time at minimum wage in this country, you were above the poverty line. You had enough money to make your ends meet. In 1988, 20 years later, full-time job, minimum wage level, you were 25% below the poverty line. Not enough money to make ends meet.
You know, one of the stereotypes of the homeless, in addition to the ones that you mentioned, are people that are unemployed. People automatically assume that the homeless are all unemployed people, but there aren't. Is there a significant number of homeless people who are working homeless?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Especially in this county, in the shelters in this county where people are staying who are homeless. A large number of them go to work every day. They just, at minimum wage, cannot possibly earn enough money to afford housing in this community.
Point 3 here, you say that unraveling the causes, unaffordable housing contributes to this unstable environment. I think we've covered that point. Point 4, unraveling the causes, inadequate social support services within this unstable environment. Is that what you've noticed?
Yes, social support services include things you don't usually think about. It's health care, it's education, it's transportation, it's food, it's everything besides housing and money.
And then number 5, it says unraveling the causes. Personal crisis within this unstable environment leads to the reality of being homeless.
Right. That's
what did you mean by that?
That's the divorce that we were talking about, or the domestic breakup, the eviction, loss of job, family problems.
So it's not a bunch of deadbeats just not working. It's people that are a victim of circumstance, perhaps.
Absolutely.
Something happened.
Or people who are very much like all the rest of us. They really are like you and me, and that's probably the hardest thing to accept. It's the thing that makes me the most teary, because it's just frightening how many people are homeless who are exactly like people who are not homeless.
I think a lot of people don't get that.
No, they don't.
Just don't get
Well,
it.
it's a frightening thing to have to accept, because if it could happen to somebody who's just like you, it can happen to you.
Oh, I know.
Nobody wants to deal with the reality.
What about the citizens who are concerned that a lot of the homeless are from out of state? Is that are the numbers really leaning toward that there are a tremendous amount of people from out of state that are coming here in hope of a better life, or as some negative thinkers say, to get a bigger welfare payment because it's tremendously much higher than it is down south, southern region of the United States? How close is that? I know it's hard to track these people and where they come from, but what do the numbers say?
Well, it's really easy to ask people how long have you lived in this community and where did you come from before that. We've never found anybody who moved to any place in the Bay Area because they thought they were going to get a bigger welfare check or they were going to get a better shelter to live in. There are people who move here, like every other segment of this community in the state of California, for a better job, for a job that they were promised, for a better income, to stay with families or friends, to get married and it doesn't work out. Life experiences, normal to all the rest of us, are exactly what people who are homeless have survived. There are studies, though, that try to track what has happened, and are there what we call magnets, places where people go. Florida thinks it's a magnet because of its great weather. Massachusetts thinks it's a magnet because of its great so-called welfare programs. There's all kinds of stereotypes within every community where people think, oh, we're the place they'll all come for one reason or another. And all the studies that have been done show that homelessness is such a profoundly debilitating experience for individuals that the most logical behavior people do engage in is to stay very close to what was their home. They stay in their neighborhood, they stay with their families and their friends, and they hope desperately that within a few months they're going to have it back together. They don't pick up and go to Texas, and they sure don't pick up from there and come here.
So they're really immobile as well.
Oh,
they can't go anywhere.
Now, Martha, how did you get involved in this? You're the founder of HomeBase. Now, how did you get involved in all of this?
HomeBase was started when I was an attorney at Public Advocates, which is a public interest law firm in the Bay Area, and we actually looked at it as lawyers trying to figure out, well, here's a social problem just as, you know, overcrowding in prisons or segregated school systems, and let's file a lawsuit and do something about it. And in the course of our research, we found that this problem is the intersection of all other problems. There is no one lawsuit that can be filed. There is no one bad actor who can be blamed for this problem. It's a community-wide problem. It's a public policy problem, and we've designed HomeBase as a response to that, to try to get to some solutions.
Is there any kind of emergency plan or contingency plan that can be implemented to provide help right away to people that are really desperate?
Yes, we've helped put in place several emergency kinds of responses to the issue, and now we're trying to take the bigger look. We're looking at things like in Santa Clara County, you have a 25,000 unit shortfall of low-income housing. You've known that for 10 years. We're trying to figure out what do we have to do to motivate people to create the housing units that match income levels. We're not, you know, talking about giving it away free, but create some housing that matches minimum wage, or raise minimum wage. And be, you know, your choices are few, but you got to do something, and doing nothing is just not getting it.
I notice here on 6 it says learning from the past and planning for the future. What do you mean by that? We've talked a little bit about it, I think.
Right. Well, we did a chapter in this report to try to give people a big enough context to understand what's going on. And we went back to other points in Western civilization when there were a large number of people who fell out of the normal system. And this report gives you a chapter where it talks about the Middle Ages, the shift from agrarian culture to industrial economies, the shift in this country from the Civil War to the Industrial Revolution, from the Depression on into the New Deal. And at each of those points in history, major changes happened in the way government and private people responded to the issue of homelessness. And we describe what those changes were in the past, and we try to then say, if you understand this about our culture, let's plan for our future and not just sit here and wait for it to happen.
It seems to me, though, in our society, we're going to more of a service-oriented society based on what I've been reading. And rather than manufacturing of equipment and computers, we're going to software. So it seems to me that there's going to be some major fallouts.
Well, the fallouts are no different than they were when we went from agriculture to industry. And what happened is that the birth of industry, we created the labor movement. And the labor movement, the union movement, took us through how many decades of wars and murders and killing and fighting to establish rights for workers in manufacturing plants. It took us decades to create minimum wage, quite frankly, to create a working day that made sense, to create child labor laws, to create laws that protected women within industry. We had a whole cycle of history in this country to create that. And what we're saying is, wake up. Realize that people had to die for those rights, and that the rights have become meaningless because we've changed the way that we employ people. We don't have manufacturing plants anymore. The unions don't protect people who are in the service economy in the same way, and there are no rights within the service economy. And that's why so many people are working full-time and living on the street, because they are not being given rights in the newly created situations where they are employed, like private security guards. And we need to wake up as a community and understand that we have this relationship with each other, and that it's not okay just to say, well, you have a job and you're making money, so it's your private business how you house yourself and how you get health care and how you get educated. It's not private anymore, it's public.
Because that's the perception that a lot of people have.
We're making it private, and we're leaving it shunted over there where we don't have to watch it. But it comes back as homelessness, and we have to see it. So we have to start looking at, where are people employed, where can we create employment opportunities, and what needs do people have that they can't meet based on their income from that employment, and how can we as a community then begin to build a way to meet those needs.
And all this information that is in this book, Homelessness in the Bay Area, that is put out by HomeBase, I understand is substantiated by another study that was recently done by Stanford.
Right. Right. Our report is substantiated by studies that have been done all over the country. It is a little bizarre, actually. We just finished a report on Marin County, sort of has its own stereotype image. The data in that report matches data that just came out of New York City in terms of who's homeless, their educational levels, their use of drugs. A number of factors are all the same. I mean, it's just the same thing. The Stanford study was somewhat unique. It came out last spring because it focused on the needs of children, and it really looked at where are they in the educational system, and found things that we had already said. These kids are out here in your schools, and they are living in shelters, and you don't know it. You the teacher, you the principal, you the people trying to educate them, don't understand their life.
Martha, we only have a minute. I certainly want to compliment you. I read this report in detail very carefully, and I'm somewhat analytical, and I didn't find anything wrong with it at all. I thought it was right on.
Thank you.
It was well done, and you're to be complimented on this. Just briefly, what do you see happening in the next 5 years? Is this going to get worse, or do you think people are going to suddenly be revived, or we're going to have a revival in terms of change of intellect? Or
I think we are having a revival. I think it's gotten so bad, and the sort of homelessness as a magnet pulling people out of these three balls, the balls out of balance, people falling out of the system. It's reaching a higher and higher cut of people on the income scale and on the lifestyle scale. And I think because of that, we're going to get new people involved in creating the solutions.
You know, we're out of time. We could do another show on this. I think maybe we should later. And Martha Fleetwood, thank you so much for being on the show. If you want to get involved with Focus 360, you can call us at 408-867-7820, or you can write us at P.O. Box 2477, and that's in Saratoga, California. If you'd like to know more about the homeless in the Bay Area, you can call Martha Fleetwood at HomeBase, and that's 415-788-7961. 7961. Well, I believe that's a wrap. See you next time, everybody.
Thanks for joining us.